This is Fothentic History.
Welcome to this episode of Fothentic History. I'm Brian Young.
And I'm Holly Fry.
So today we're going to be talking about weeping angels, which are also known as the Lonely Assassins. They've been referred to by the Doctor as the only psychopaths in the universe to kill you nicely, as well as irredeemably evil. We'll go through what we know about their origins and where they may come from, and their well-known and some of their less well-known run-ins with the Doctor over the course of their history.
And to start with, we'll define what a weeping angel is for anyone here who may not know. They were a race of quantum-locked humanoids who resembled statues carved of stone. They don't actually exist when they're being observed, which is to say that they are stone when they are being seen by any other being, including other weeping angels, which is why many times weeping angels appear to be covering their eyes with their hands to prevent themselves from capturing each other in this unique quantum-locked state that would, if it were to happen, negate each other's existence.
They fed on temporal energy created by sending a victim back in time and consuming the time energy that they would have lived had they done so in the present. So this was why the Doctor referred to them as kind killers, as they would merely send their victims back to the past. They would divorce them from everything they knew and loved in the present and send them back to die of old age in a time they didn't know and had no connection to. This wasn't the only energy they could feed from, though we will talk about that later for sure.
And when they sent their victims back in time, they generally sent them back about 40 years. And that was in order to prevent them from crossing their own timelines, which would, of course, create problematic paradoxes. And it would also infect their food supply. And if the angels were to get involved in those paradoxes themselves, that would cause a situation where they could be feeding on themselves, which would obviously be bad for them. So they avoided that whenever possible and took great pains to do so.
Some weeping angels had specific spots in time they liked to send their victims as well. One liked to send its victim back to the 1920s. Another preferred specifically 1969. And we'll talk about 1969 and 1920 at length later in the episode.
And young weeping angels resembled cherubic babies, like the images you would think of when you conjure Cupid, replete with little wings. And sometimes they would even have stone bows and arrows that they carried. And when unseen, they could be heard giggling like children, which was often incredibly unsettling for their intended victims. And they could also get larger in size with more powerful angels happening as well. At one point, the Statue of Liberty was consumed by a weeping angel.
Weeping angels, when they were existing as weeping angels, weren't actually made of stone. They only adopted that form to protect themselves when they were in their quantum-locked state, keeping them safe from harm. Otherwise, they'd be easily dealt with and destroyed. And they're not actually the statues they're seen as. They just move too quickly to be seen as what they are actually. They're usually, the statues are usually taken over by the angels themselves, but they grow weaker with starvation, and the stone in the bodies they inhabit can chip away from this starvation and wear away over time. So an angel that has been weakened by the starvation will appear worn away by the weather, like you might see a statue exactly in that state, wasted away by time.
So this, of course, brings up the question, where did they come from? And the origin is actually a mystery, although the Doctor suspected that they were as old as the universe itself. The Time Lords themselves believed that angels may have evolved at the dawn of time, and Time Lord society viewed them almost as a mythological creature. Another theory that was positive was that they might have evolved from a plague, kind of like what happened on the planet Gehenna.
They existed before Earth did, however, because there were 3 angels, and we will talk a little bit about them later, that had been trapped inside asteroids that had come together in the debris cloud that had accreted to Earth to create Earth itself, trapping them inside Earth. And angels had long been part of Earth's mythology in various ways. In fact, the story of Medusa was said to have been rooted in the mythology of weeping angels.
And the Doctor was actually skeptical of their existence until actually running into them, first during his 4th incarnation. So we have to level set a little bit here because we are aware that there are more incarnations before what is generally accepted as the 4th in the formal count. But to make things easier today, we are going to discuss the Doctor's incarnations as they have been commonly known. So when we say the 4th Doctor, you will know that as the incarnation with the long scarf and a mane of curly hair and a taste for jelly babies.
So the first incarnation of the Doctor to run into weeping angels was that 4th incarnation. He'd been on a journey with his companions Leela and Margaret Hopwood, intending to bring them to a jungle planet. They were surprised to find a desolate planet barren of life instead. As they discovered, the planet had been decimated by solar flares a century prior, but they did find crashed remnants of a spaceship luxury liner sort of cruise ship situation.
And they then found out that the surviving crew and passengers were being taken out one by some unknown killer. When the Doctor arrived on the scene with his companions, the surviving passengers and crew originally actually thought the Doctor was the murderer, but when more people vanished, when that was obviously not something he was doing, that suspicion was quickly abandoned. And the Doctor himself began at this point to suspect the weeping angels could be involved when he found a stone hand, but he still held on to his skepticism.
After finally seeing one of the angels and seeing that it was missing parts of an arm and its face, that its face was practically sanded off, the Doctor theorized that they could be the weeping angels, but that these angels might be sick somehow, since they had fed on a sizable amount of the crew and the passengers, more than enough to be able to get to full strength, but these angels were still in a weakened state.
And with the help of his companions and the remaining crew of this downed luxury liner, the Doctor was able to set a trap for an angel. But it was thwarted, actually, by a passenger who was under the influence of the weeping angels. And eventually, the angel sent the entirety of the passengers and crew back in time, and the Doctor and his companions were able to escape the ship and the planet, leaving the angel to wither without a source of food. But the Doctor was at this point no longer skeptical about the existence of weeping angels, and he knew they were real from that point forward.
The next run-in the Doctor would have with weeping angels was in his 5th incarnation. This would be the incarnation that favored a vest and a piece of celery on his clothing for whatever reason. He'd been investigating temporal anomalies and discovered that the painters Michelangelo and Caravaggio had actually disappeared. He found it unusual that when he arrived on Earth, the Sistine Chapel was no longer complete after the year 1511, which that would be disconcerting.
Yeah, the chapel didn't actually get finished till 1512. I'll have
But-
lots of nerdy Michelangelo talk otherwise.
Well, no, but he'd found that all work had he showed up in the future and found that all work had stopped in 1511 and it
that's
never
what
got finished.
That's
So,
what I'm saying.
That's
That's how he
terrifying.
knew it was
Yeah.
incorrect.
Yeah.
So the Doctor, with the help of a married couple who had been sent back to 1511 in 2015 by a weeping angel that had replaced Michelangelo's statue of Moses, determined that 3 angels had been trapped in an asteroid and had been discovered in blocks of marble by the priests. And they took the most complete angel that was found to be a miracle. They misinterpreted it. And under the influence of the main angel, they hired Michelangelo to carve the other angels free from the blocks.
Because that's what you do, right?
Get your best artists.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those angels probably looked the best. The angels were interested in displacing artists like Michelangelo because they realized they had a stronger temporal presence to feed on, not only because they could feed on the days that the artist would no longer live in their present time, but they would be able to feed on the days that their great works of art would no longer exist, thereby satiating their hunger for longer.
And learning of this danger that the angels possessed, Michelangelo went to work aiding the Fifth Doctor in capturing these weeping angels. They were able to construct a trap in the catacombs beneath the Sistine Chapel using mirrors to surround the angels, preventing them from looking away from each other. This is an interesting place to do it because that's also where the popes are entombed. Since weeping angels can see in pitch black darkness, as we all know, it was easy enough for the Doctor and Michelangelo to just seal these three angels in these catacombs for all time and undo the damage that they had done.
Unfortunately, the Doctor was unable to bring Joel and Gabby, that married couple, back to 2015 in order to live out the rest of their lives in their original time, as it would risk creating a time paradox. So they were forced out to live the remainder of their lives in 1511 and beyond, but at least they had each other.
The next time that the Doctor ran into the weeping angels would be in his 8th incarnation. And by this time, he had given up his long hair and his ruffled shirts and was favoring a leather jacket. And he was traveling with his companions Liv and Helen, investigating a temporal anomaly that brought them to a record shop in London in the year 2025. And the Doctor's companion, Helen, was sent back to 1963 by a weeping angel that had been kept in the record store's storage area. That was all actually part of a really elaborate and pretty ingenious plot on the part of the record store owners, because they had found a way to keep the weeping angel in captivity and used it to make a lot of money with the record store.
Yeah, so they would send order forms for rare records using the Weeping Angel back to 1963 with the Weeping Angel's powers, and then buy the records while they were cheap, leaving them in the storage area. And then they would procure them for folks in 2025 seeking them for collector's rates. So it was quite a clever plan, except for the part where one of the most evil creatures known in the universe was just sitting in their storage shed.
And eventually, the 8th Doctor was able to lure the record shop angels into a time paradox that nullified their existence, but he was unable to bring the record shop owners back to the present day. They were eventually sent back to the 1890s and were forced to live out the rest of their lives there. Again, these angels were kind killers as long as you didn't mind living out the rest of your life in some other random time period.
Imagine, like, your whole life's work is like curating really great music and records from the 60s, and like you're just like, well, I live in the 1890s now.
They could be there when the phonograph is in its infancy. They might have loved it.
They could just set up their future ancestors and just say like, okay, here's the stuff you got to collect.
Yeah.
So the Doctor's next run-in with the Weeping Angels might have been his most difficult, harrowing, and most well-known, and this involved his 10th incarnation. And this one was known for wearing a trench coat, Converse shoes, and had that little uppy flip of hair. He was traveling with his companion, the nurse Martha Jones, when they came upon an abandoned house on the outskirts of London called Wester Drumlands.
And they had no idea that this house had not been abandoned by choice, but because 4 weeping angels had taken up residence there and fed on all of the energy of the occupants over the years. When the 10th Doctor and Martha Jones arrived there in the TARDIS, the angels had a new idea for feeding.
So to give you a little bit of context about the TARDIS, you'll need, before we get too far along, the TARDIS was the Doctor's ship that could travel through time and space, and TARDIS was actually an acronym that stood for time and relative dimension in space. The ship was immensely powerful and full of the same sort of time energy that weeping angels could feed on.
And so, as you can imagine, when these 4 weeping angels saw the TARDIS just arrive on their doorstep, they immediately perceived it as an opportunity to have a power source to vastly increase their food supply.
Just eyes as big as dinner plates.
So their first step was to get rid of the Doctor and Martha Jones, which they were actually able to handle quite easily. They sent the Doctor and Martha back to London in 1969 and then set their minds to getting into the TARDIS. They had snagged the key to the TARDIS from the Doctor as they sent him back in time, but they hadn't yet figured out how to use it to actually get into the TARDIS when they were suddenly interrupted.
Yeah, a London photographer named Sally Sparrow arrived at the house to take pictures of this decrepit old place. And wandering upstairs as she took pictures, she found 2 curious letters painted on a wall, obscuring a larger message behind the wallpaper. Pulling at that wallpaper, she found it tore away easily, revealing the message, "Beware the Weeping Angels," which, to be honest, that's fairly ominous. But noticed that there were more letters as well, and continuing to pull, she saw the message, "Duck now, Sally Sparrow," which was not only ominous, but very specific.
And despite not knowing its origin, she did as told, and she ducked as the message specifically instructed her, only to have a rock whiz right over her head. And then tearing away more of the wallpaper, the note to duck was signed, "Love from the Doctor." 1969 was the date on it. And looking out the window, she saw a stone statue covering its eyes in the courtyard below. And this was sufficiently creepy for Sally to bail on that house.
This one does.
Yeah. She went to her friend Kathy's house where she was introduced to Kathy's brother Larry. Larry had this like weird obsession with a specific DVD extra where there was a man in glasses holding a one-sided conversation and giving instructions to somebody to not blink. And he very sternly says, "Blink and you're dead."
With this ominous advice rattling around in her head, Sally Sparrow returned to Wester Drumlins the next day with her friend Kathy. Sally brought Kathy upstairs to where she found the message behind the wallpaper when the doorbell rang. Leaving Kathy upstairs by herself, as a great friend does, Sally went back down to answer the door of this house that is abandoned and not hers, where she found a courier delivering a letter to her. He claimed to be delivering a letter on behalf of his grandmother to this exact time and place, specifically to Sally Sparrow. Hearing a door, while this was all going on, slam shut upstairs, she asks who his grandmother was, and he names her friend Kathy.
So Sally ran upstairs, and she found that Kathy was missing, and there were 3 weeping angels in the room in her place. Dangling from a hand of one of these angels was the key to the TARDIS, and Sally very smartly grabbed it before fleeing the house once more to read the letter. And there she discovered that the angels had sent Kathy back to 1920. While she was there, she led a very full life. She had a family. And Kathy's request for Sally was to tell her brother Larry all of what had been going on, and Sally readily complied.
So Larry's the one who showed her all of these DVD extras featuring the man in glasses holding a one-sided conversation. And this was actually the Doctor. And thanks to people around Sally that had been sent back in time, he was able to send messages to Sally through the DVD Easter eggs on the 17 DVDs that she actually owned in her collection. Able to have conversations with the Doctor through time from 1969 in this way, she was able to get the information she needed to understand what the Weeping Angels were, how she could help the Doctor get his TARDIS back, and how she could rescue him and his companion from 1969.
Using one of these DVDs, Sally was able to send the TARDIS back to 1969 to rescue the Doctor. The Weeping Angels closed in on her, surrounding her and the TARDIS, but they were not counting on the TARDIS disappearing. And as the TARDIS vanished back into the past, they all became quantum locked in each other's gaze, essentially killing all of those 4 particular angels.
And that wasn't the end of the situation, though, because, like, how did the Doctor get all of the information? How did he get the transcripts of the conversation they had? So in order to close that time loop, about Sally Sparrow, she would need to get him all of that information about the Weeping Angels and their conversations and everything. So one day, about a year later, she saw the Doctor randomly running down the street with Martha Jones, and they had a bow and arrow, I believe, as the Doctor and Martha Jones might have. And she handed him a packet of information with all the transcripts and all the information he needed. And she assured him that his future self would need it to be able to communicate with her so he could escape 1969. And that sort of closed the loop on that situation so that no time paradoxes were able to occur out of that.
And then the next major interaction between the Doctor and the Weeping Angels happened between them when he was in his 11th incarnation. And this was the one that fancied tweed and bow ties and fezzes. He was alerted to an issue by his future/past wife, River Song. And alongside his companion, Amy Pond, he was visiting a museum in the year 12,000. And he found a message to him written in Gallifreyan on an artifact that read, "Hello, sweetie." And following the clues to the artifact, he found River Song on the planet Alphava Metraxis.
On the surface of the planet was a crashed ship, the Byzantium, and aboard it, a being that was said to be immortal. River explained to the Doctor that that being inside the crashed ship was a weeping angel, and that they had security camera footage of the weeping angel. River then introduced the Doctor to her reinforcements, which included Father Octavian, who was a bishop second class of the church, which was a heavily armed and militant wing of clergy hell-bent on destroying, among other things, weeping angels.
And then she produced a book about the Weeping Angels, and she let the Doctor read it. And as he read it and discussed the angels with River Song and the militant Father Octavius, Amy watched the recording of the Weeping Angel and noticed that the recording did not remain the same. It was not consistent. As she stared at it, she noticed that it started moving. And when she tried to turn the monitor off, she found that she could not. And this, of course, caused her to panic and beg for the Doctor's help. And he realized there was something missing from that book about weeping angels that River had given him to read.
Yeah, there were no images of weeping angels in the book. And that was because that the book stated that whatever took on the image of an angel became an angel itself. And since the angels could take on and inhabit the forms of statues, they could take on the forms of anything in the image of these statues as well. And the recording that Amy was watching of a weeping angel had become another angel in and of itself. And it was almost able to let itself loose among the camp of the church. But Amy and the Doctor managed to pause the video just as it looped between its beginning and its end when the angel wasn't actually in the frame, making it vanish from existence before it was able to fully manifest.
As the Doctor and River and Amy and the military clerics of the church entered the Byzantium, they found not one weeping angel, but many of them. It turns out that they were being replenished by the radiation that was leaking from the engines of the crashed ship. Crashing the ship on the planet had actually been part of their plan the whole time. They had consumed so many of the people and all of their temporal energy, and so they had run out of food, and they needed an alternate means to feed. And the radiation from the engines, that was a sufficient energy source.
And the Doctor found another curious thing there on the ship. As the angels were taking victims, they were not displacing them through time, which is something he had not encountered before. They were actually turning them into angels. They were replenishing angels. They were creating an army. So surrounded and outnumbered by a growing number of angels, the Doctor had to come up with an unexpected plan to save those he cared about, River and Amy, and those who had not yet been turned into this growing army. So as unpredictable as the Doctor could be, he hit the artificial gravity on the ship, and a race was on to escape both the ship and this growing army of weeping angels.
And inside the ship, the Doctor found a crack in reality that had actually been chasing him. And the angels asked him to sacrifice himself in the crack in order to close it. But of course, the Doctor had a much different idea in mind. Further manipulating that artificial gravity, he was able to use the crack to suck this army of regenerated angels from the existence of reality.
Well, that took care of that.
Indeed.
Yeah. There were a few other minor incidents the Doctor dealt with involving Weeping Angels before their next major battle with the Doctor. One of these involved a lawyer who found himself changing the events of his life thanks to a group of Weeping Angels feeding on the small paradoxes created by these changes. Another involved a magician named Sammy Starr who foolishly used a Weeping Angel in his act to have volunteers vanish before the eyes of the audience.
Yeah, he planned to use the angel for his first TV appearance, which the Doctor was pretty eager to put a stop to, because that, of course, would have had the potential to put a weeping angel in the living room of every single home that had tuned into the broadcast, which, would have been
it's bad news.
Objectively bad. But for this major infestation of angels, we go to the island of Manhattan. This is the next one. And the 11th Doctor and his in-laws at this point, Amy and Rory Pond, visit New York. And when Rory is cast back to 1938 Manhattan, the Doctor discovers that the angels have been using Manhattan as a feeding ground and that Manhattan is so temporally volatile that he could not travel there.
In 1938, Rory found that his daughter, the Doctor's wife, who turned out to be River Song, which was a great shock to everyone when they found that out. She was actually investigating, she was in 1938 investigating the Weeping Angels, and as she was doing this, she'd written a book about the ordeal, and that book had somehow found its way in the hands of the Doctor and Amy in 2012. And that gave the Doctor and Amy information that they needed to pierce the temporal wall that blocked them and get them into 1938 in an attempt to stop the angels and rescue Rory. And that was really dicey because if they knew too much about what was happening, then it made it certain that those things were going to happen. So they'd settled on, well, we're just going to look at chapter titles, which still was problematic for them.
So you can read a book by its cover. Or
Yeah.
judge a book by its cover. The thing is, though, they discovered something truly horrifying because what they found out was that the Weeping Angels were actually running a nursing home and they were sending people back in time over and over again, holding them prisoner until their deaths. And when they captured Rory, they had put him through this repeatedly. And the Doctor explained that they couldn't rescue Rory without creating a paradox. He would be on the run for the rest of his life.
The Doctor theorized, though, that some sort of paradox could poison the food supply of the Weeping Angels if they did something to disrupt the time cycle they were existing in. And Amy and Rory took to the roof of the nursing home and hand in hand leapt off the roof together. And this was an incredible leap of faith and could have very well been the death of them. But as they hit the bottom and they hit the pavement, they ended that loop that the angels had put them in and found themselves back at their picnic in 2012.
There, in the cemetery where they had had their picnic, lurked a weeping angel. It touched Rory, and that sent him back to the past once more. Amy, of course, grew panicked, unable to fathom that they had just saved him, and now it was happening again. And remembering her and that he couldn't travel back to save them, the Doctor tried to drag her back to the TARDIS, but she refused to be taken back. She actually ran after the Weeping Angel and joined her husband in the past because she wanted to live out the rest of their lives till old age, even though that meant never seeing the Doctor again.
And that seemed to be the last of the Weeping Angels for quite a long time in the Doctor's life. But the 13th iteration of the Doctor briefly had to deal with them during the Flux crisis. The 13th was regenerated as a woman and had rainbow suspenders and usually a yellow coat. And the Flux was a huge destructive mass of antimatter from outside the universe that had threatened our universe.
And the Doctor was really determined to stop it. But at one
she
point,
would be, yeah.
I mean, thankfully, but at one point in that journey, a weeping angel essentially hijacked the TARDIS. Obviously, again, not an ideal situation. And so she had to perform a manual reboot of the TARDIS in order to eject this angel from the system. And her companions, Dan Lewis and Yasmin Khan, were both hit by weeping angels and sent back in time to 1901. The only way that the Doctor was able to defeat these weeping angels was by defeating the threat of the Flux altogether, which negated the events that happened during that situation.
And that's the gist of it. So far as we know in recorded history with the Doctor and the Weeping Angels, these were the major run-ins between the Doctor and these historic foes of theirs.
Yes, until an archaeologist turns up a new documentary piece or a piece of evidence.
And there are quite a few lost adventures out there. Hopefully they find those and get those out at some point. But the Weeping Angels were not kind, even if they did kill you in a kind way. And if you see one, don't blink. They can move lightning fast, but as long as you keep eyes on them, they won't be able to move. So keeping them quantum locked is the best way to stay safe.
And otherwise, you have no idea where you'll end up, and more importantly, when you'll end up.
And that's it for this episode of Authentic History, a special live edition here at FanX Salt Lake City. So thank you for sticking with us through this, and